busy day. So I'm going to fix my hair. Let me fix this too while we wait for folks to come on in. Good. I'm so grateful that my hair is now bun length, because elastics and even the fabric covered ones are really, they put a lot of stress on the roots of your hair, and yeah, it feels so good. When you've been sweaty and working, nothing feels good like having your hair brushed and your scalp have a good scratch out. Oh, there we go. Oh. Whoops. Don't let her go. Don't let her go. Yeah, it'll be good enough till bedtime. 2 pins. That's all it takes for me. And watch it fall out. There we go. I'm a 2-pin bun granny. How's everybody doing tonight? For those folks who were on our half-acre homestead today, watching me work on the planters live, I finished them. Both are planted. And the second one, the last one, is a surprise twist, so you'll have to watch the video. Went in the pool. Don't you dare call me a liar. I went in the pool. I got on the top step, and then I stepped down into the water past my ankles, and then down. Ooh, getting the backs of my knees in the water was pretty cold, was pretty hard. And then where you going, sweetheart? I think he said he's got to do something he's got to do. Talk to a man about a dog or something. I don't know. Do you say you're going to talk to a man about a dog?
Buy a horse.
You're going to buy a horse? Those are hay burners, man. What are we going to do with a horse? But we're just deciding on going smaller with dogs.
Knock it up and I'd be heading way into the bush, getting the hell out of here.
Unorganized land? All right. Just, I'll have to buy a hoop quilt frame first. We have our little, daydreams of disappearing into the bush. Really. So, what else is going on? We got our live at 8 o'clock on Life with the Wolfies, and that's where all the fun stuff is. Tonight, I'm going to put a little bit of... I made this hand sanitizer when I was... during the pandemic. Before all this stuff hit, you could buy a 6-pack of 99% alcohol at Costco. And so I put this much 99% alcohol and then this much aloe vera gel. And it just makes the nicest, refreshing... Oh, I got a cut on my hand. Ooh. All right. Welcome to Little House Live. I guess we've been here long enough. Welcome to Little House Live. We are on Chapter 14, Spring Freshette. Yeah, it's the French. Gets to you. On the banks of Plum Creek, Chapter 14. In the middle of the night, Laura sat straight up in bed. She had never heard anything like the roaring at the door. Pa, what's that? She screamed. Sounds like the creek, he said. Jumping out of bed, he opened the door and the roaring came into the black darkness of the dugout. It scared Laura. She heard Pa shouting, Jiminy crickets, it's raining fish hooks and hammer handles. Ma said something that Laura could not hear. Can't see a thing, Pa shouted. It's as dark as a stack of black cats. Don't worry, the creek can't get this high. It'll go over the bank on the other side. He shut the door and the roaring was not so loud. Go to sleep, Laura, he said, but Laura lay awake listening to that roaring thundering by the door. When she opened her eyes, The window was gray. Pa was gone. Ma was getting breakfast. But the creek was still roaring. In a flash, Laura was out of bed and opening the door. Whoosh! Icy cold rain went all over her and took her breath away. She jumped out into the cold water. She jumped out into cold water pouring down her whole skin. Right at her feet was the rushing and roaring. The creek was rushing and roaring. The path ended where she was. Angry water was leaping and rolling over the steps that used to go down to the footbridge. The willow clumps were drowned and the treetops swirled in yellow foam. The noise crowded into Laura's ears. She could not hear the rain. She felt it beating on her sopping wet nightgown. She felt it striking her head as if she had no hair, but she heard only the creek's wild roaring. The fast, strong water was fearful and fascinating. It snarled, foaming through the willow tops, and swirled far out on the prairie. It came dashing high and white around the bend in the upstream. It was always changing and always the same, the strong and terrible. Suddenly, Ma jerked Laura into the dugout, asking her, "Didn't you hear me call you?" "No, Ma," Laura said. "Well, no," Ma said. "I suppose you didn't." Water was streaming down Laura and making a puddle around her bare feet. Ma pulled off her sticking wet nightgown and rubbed her hard all over with a towel. "Now dress quickly or you'll catch your death of cold," Ma said. But Laura was glowing warm. She had never felt so fine and frisky. Mary said, "I'm surprised at you, Laura. I wouldn't go out into the rain and get all wet like that." Sorry. "Oh, Mary, you just ought to see the creek," Laura cried as she asked, "Ma, may I go out and see it again after breakfast?" "You may not," said Ma. "Not while it's raining." But while they were eating breakfast, the rain stopped. The sun was shining, and Pa said that Laura and Mary might go with him to look at the creek. The air was fresh and clean and damp. It smelled like spring. The blue sky with large clouds sailing in it. All the snow was gone from the soaking wet earth. Up on the high bank, Laura could still hear the creek roaring. "This weather beats me," said Pa. "Never saw anything like it." "Is it still grasshopper weather?" Laura asked, but Pa didn't know. They went along the high bank, looking at the strange sights. The roaring and foaming creek changed everything. The plum thickets were only foamy brushwood in the water. The tableland was a round island. All around it, the water flowed smoothly, coming out of a wide, humping river and running back into it. Where the swimming pool had been, the tall willows were short willows standing in the lake. Beyond them, the land that Pa had plowed by lay black and wet. Pa looked at it and said, "It won't be long now till I can get that wheat planted." That was chapter 14. Would you like me to read more? I have the time. All right, let me pop out the participants and say, "Hi, DJ, Darth Ano, Kathy Ponder, Linda Bopp." I hope everybody is having a wonderful evening. I'm beat, but I'll tell you what, it was a good day's work. I'm not kidding. So, yes, please. All right. Chapter 15, The Footbridge. The next day, Laura was sure that Ma would not let her go out to play in the creek. It was still roaring, but more softly. In the dugout, she could hear it calling her. So Laura quietly slipped outdoors without saying anything to Ma. The water was not so high now. It had gone down from the steps, and Laura could see it foaming against the footbridge. Part of the plank was above the water. All winter the creek had been covered with ice. It had been motionless and still, never making a sound. Now it was running swiftly and making a joyful noise. Where it struck the edge of the plank, it foamed up in white bubbles and laughed to itself. Laura took off her shoes and stockings and put them safely on the bottom step. Then she walked out on the plank and stood watching the noisy water. Drops splashed her bare feet and thin little waves ran around them. She dabbled one foot in the swirling foam. Then down she sat on the plank and plumped both legs into the water. The creek ran strong against them, and she kicked against it. That was fun. Now she was wet almost all over, but her whole skin wanted to be in the water. She lay on her stomach and thrust her arms down on each side of the plank, deep in the fast current. But that was not enough. She wanted to be really in the roaring, joyous creek. I was 13 when I dove into a creek that the ice had just come out of. And I wasn't a very good swimmer. She clasped her hands, okay, but that was not enough. She wanted to be really in the roaring, joyful, joyous creek. She clasped her hands together under the plank and rolled off it. In that very instant, she knew the creek was not playing. It was strong and terrible. It seized her whole body, and it pulled it under the plank. Only her head was out, and one arm desperately across the narrow plank. The water was pulling her, and it was pushing too. It was trying to drag her under the plank. Her chin held on to the edge, and her arm clutched, while the water pulled hard at the rest of her. It was not laughing now. No one knew where she was. No one could hear her if she screamed for help. The water roared loud and tugged at her, stronger and stronger. Laura kicked, but the water was stronger than her legs. She got both arms across the plank and pulled, but the water pulled harder. It pulled the back of her head down, and it jerked as if it would jerk her in two. It was cold, and the coldness soaked into her. You might not remember me, but for 4 years ago, listening to you read got me through cancer surgery. I'm cancer-free, and Mom did 2 little ones. Oh, Dart, that's awesome. Thank you. That's a beautiful accolade, and thank you for sharing that. This was not like wolves or cattle. The creek was not alive. It was only strong and terrible and never stopping. It would pull her down and whirl her away, rolling and tossing her like a willow branch. It would not care. Her legs were tired. Her arms hardly felt the plank anymore. I must get out. I must, she thought. She kicked. The creek's roaring was in her head. She kicked hard with both her feet and pulled hard with her arms, and then she was laying on the plank again. The plank was solid under her stomach and under her face. She lay on it and breathed and was glad it was solid. Then when she moved, her head swirled. She crawled off the plank. She took her shoes and her stockings and she climbed slowly up the muddy steps. At the door of the dugout, she stopped. She did not know what to say to Ma. After a while, she went in. Just inside the door, she stood still and water dripped off her. Ma was sewing. "Where have you been, Laura?" Ma asked, looking up, and then she came quickly, saying, "My goodness! Turn around, quick!" She began unbuttoning Laura down the back. Never understood why they put buttons on the back. They just make more sense on the front. "What happened? Did you fall in the creek?" "No, ma'am," Laura said. I went in." Ma listened and went on undressing Laura and rubbing her hard all over with a towel. She did not say a word even when Laura had told her everything. Laura's teeth chattered and Ma wrapped a quilt around her and she sat very close to the stove. At last Ma said, "Well, Laura, you have been very naughty and I think you knew it all the time. But I can't punish you. I can't even scold you. You came near to being drowned." Laura did not say anything. "You won't go near the creek again till Pa or I say you may, and that won't be till the water gets down, until the water goes down," said Ma. "No'm," said Laura. The creek would go down. It would be a gentle, pleasant place to play in again. But nobody could make it do that. Nobody could make it do anything. Laura knew now that there were things stronger than anybody. But the creek was not but the creek had not got her. It had not made her scream, and it could not make her cry. God. You're welcome. All right, we have time for one more. Yeah, being a mom is having children, especially now. I have a grandbaby. Oh, he's so very cute. Him so very cute. I like to think that, if anything happens to me, these recordings are there for him someday, right? All right, one more chapter, and then I got to scoot because I'm going live at 8 on Life with the Wolfies, just for a general chat. All right, the wonderful house. Just like a man. The creek went down all at once. The days were warm, and early every morning Pa went to work on the wheat field with Sam and David, the Christmas horses. I declare, Ma said, you're working that ground to death and killing yourself. But Pa said the ground was dry because there had not been enough snow. He must plow deep and harrow well and get the wheat sowed quickly. Every day he was working before the sun came up, and he worked till dark. Laura waited in the dark till she heard Sam and David splashing into the ford. Then she ran into the dugout for the lantern, and she hurried to the stable to hold it so Pa could see to do the chores. He was too tired to laugh or talk. He ate supper and went to bed. At last the wheat was sowed. Then he sowed oats, and he made the potato patch in the garden. Ma and Mary and Laura helped plant the potatoes and sprinkled little seeds in the garden rows, and then let Carrie think she was helping. The whole world was green with grass now. The yellow-green willow leaves were uncurling, violets and buttercups were thick in the prairie hollows, and the sorrel's clover-like leaves and lavender blossoms were sour and good to eat. Only the wheat field was bare and brown. One evening, Pa showed Laura a faint green mist on that brown field. The wheat was up. Each tiny sprout was so thin you could hardly see it, but so many of them all together made that misty green. Everyone was happy that night because the wheat was a good stand. The next day, Pa drove to town. Sam and David could go to town and come back in one afternoon. There was hardly any time to miss Pa, and they were not even watching for him when he came home. Laura heard the wagon first, and she was the first one up the path. Pa was sitting on the wagon seat. His face was one big shining of joy, and lumber was piled high in the wagon box behind him, and he sang out, "Here's your new house, Caroline." "But Charles," Ma gasped. Laura ran and climbed up over the wheel and onto the pile of boards. She had never seen such smooth, straight, beautiful boards. They had been sawed by machinery. "But the wheat's hardly up yet," Ma said. "That's all right," Pa told her. "They'll let me have the lumber, and we'll pay for it when we sell the wheat." Laura asked him, "Are we going to have a house made of boards?" "Yes, Flutterbudget," said Pa, "we're going to have a whole house built of sawed lumber, and it's going to have glass windows." It was very true. It was really true. The next morning, Mr. Nelson came to help Pa, and they began digging the cellar for that house. They were going to have that wonderful house just because the wheat was growing. You ever hear a note, don't be counting your chicks before they're hatched? I learned that one the hard way. Laura and Mary could hardly stay in the dugout long enough to do their work, but Ma made them do it. "And I won't have you giving your work a lick and a promise," said Ma, so they washed every breakfast dish and put them all away. They made their bed neatly. They brushed the floor with the willow twig broom and set the broom in its place. Then they could go. They ran down the steps and over the footbridge and under the willows up to the prairie. They went through the prairie grasses and up to the top of a green knoll where Pa and Mr. Nelson were building the new house. It was fun to watch them set up the skeleton house. The timber stood up in slender and golden new, and the sky was very blue between them. The hammers made a gay sound. Planes cut long curly shavings from the sweet-smelling boards. Laura and Mary hung little shavings over their ears for earrings. They put them around their necks for necklaces. Laura tucked long ones in her hair, and they hung down in golden curls, just the color she had always wanted her hair to be. Upon the skeleton roof, Pa and Mr. Nelson hammered and sawed. Little blocks of wood fell down, and Laura and Mary gathered them into piles and built houses of their own. They had never had such a good time. Pa and Mr. Nelson covered the skeleton walls with slanting boards nailed on. They shingled the roof with boughten shingles. Boughten shingles were thin and all the same size. They were far finer shingles than even Pa could hew with an axe. They made an even, tight roof with not one crack in it. Then Pa laid the floor of silky smooth boards, and they were grooved along the edges that fitted together perfectly. Tongue and groove. Overhead, he laid another floor for the upstairs that made the ceiling of the downstairs. Across the downstairs, Pa put up a partition. That house was going to have 2 rooms. One was the bedroom, and the other was only to live in. He put 2 shining clear glass windows in that room, one looking towards the sunrise and beside the door to the south. In the bedroom walls he set 2 more windows, and they were glass windows too. Laura had never seen such wonderful windows. They were in halves. There were 6 panes of glass in each half, and the bottom half would push up and stay up when a stick was set under it. Opposite the front door, Pa put a back door, and outside it he built a tiny room. That was a lean-to, because it leaned in against the house. It would keep out the north winds in the winter time, and it was a place where Ma could keep her broom and mop and wash tub. Now Mr. Nelson was not there, and Laura asked questions all the time. Pa said the bedroom was for Ma and Carrie and him. He said the attic was for Mary and Laura to sleep in and to play in. Laura wanted so much to see it that he stopped work on the lean-to and nailed strips of board up the wall to make the attic ladder. Laura skipped quickly up the ladder till her head came through the hole in the attic floor. The attic was as big as both rooms downstairs. Its floor was smooth boards. Its slanting roof was the underside of fresh yellow shingles. There was a little window at each end of the attic, and those windows were glass windows. At first, Mary was scared to swing off the ladder to the attic floor. Then she was scared to step down through the floor hole and onto the ladder. Laura felt scared too, but she pretended she didn't. And they soon got used to getting on and off the ladder. Now they thought the house was done, but Pa nailed black tar paper. Pa nailed black tar paper all over the outside of the house walls. Then he nailed more boards over that paper. They were long, smooth boards, one lapping over the other, all up the sides of the house. Then around the windows and the doorways, Pa nailed flat frames. "This house is as tight as a drum," he said. There was not one single crack in the roof or the walls or the floor of that house, so to let in rain or cold winds. Then Pa put in the doors, and they were boughten doors. They were smooth and far finer than the slab doors hewed with an axe, and even thinner panels were set into them and above them and below their middles. Their hinges were boughten hinges, and it was marvelous to see them open and shut. They did not rattle like wooden hinges or let the door drag like leather hinges. Into these doors, Pa set boughten locks with keys that went into small shaped holes and turned and clicked. The locks had white china doorknobs. Then one day Pa said, "Laura and Mary, can you keep a secret?" "Oh, yes, Pa," they said. "Promise you won't tell Ma." he asked, and they promised. He opened the lean-to door, and there stood a shiny black cook stove. Pa had bought it from town and hidden it there to surprise Ma. On the top, that cook stove had 4 round holes, and 4 round lids fitted them. Each lid had a grooved hole in it, and there was an iron handle that fitted into the holes to lift the lid by. In front, there was a long, low door. There were slits in this door, and a piece of iron would slide back and forth to close these slits or open them. That was the draught. We call it the draft. Under it, a shelf-like oblong pan stuck out. That was to catch the ashes and keep them from dropping on the floor. A lid swung flat over this hollowed-out shelf, and on the lid were raised iron letters in rows. He put a wood stove on a wood floor. I would have made a rock bed or something, like creek bed and clay and that. Because that's just bloody day. That's stupid. I'm sorry. But maybe Laura didn't remember. But Mary put her finger on the bottom row and spelled out P-A-T, 17 odd. She asked Pa, "What does that spell, Pa?" "It spells Pat," Pa said. Laura opened a big door on the side of the stove and looked into a big square place with a shelf across it. "Oh, Pa, what is this for?" she asked him. "It's the oven," Pa told her. He lifted that marvelous stove and set it in the living room and put up the stovepipe piece by piece. The stovepipe went up through the ceiling and the attic and through a hole he had sawed in the roof. Then Pa climbed onto the roof and he set a larger tin pipe over the stovepipe. The tin pipe had spread out flat. Had a spread out flat bottom that covered the hole in the roof. Not a drop of rain would run down the stovepipe into the new house. That was a prairie chimney. "Well, that's done," Pa said. "Even to a prairie chimney. There was nothing more that a house could possibly have. The glass windows made the inside of the house so light that you could hardly know you were in a house. It smelled clean and piney from the yellow new boards and walls and floor. The cook stove stood lordly in the corner by the lean-to door. A touch on the white china doorknob swung the bottom door on its bottom hinges, and the doorknob's little iron tongue clicked and held the door shut. "We'll move in tomorrow morning," Pa said. "This is the last night we'll sleep in a dugout." Laura and Mary took his hands and they went down the knoll. The wheat field was a silky, shimmery green rippling over a curve of the prairie. Its sides were straight and its corners square, and all around it the wild prairie grasses looked coarser and darker green. Laura looked back at the wonderful house. In the sunshine on the knoll, its sawed lumber walls and roof were as golden as a straw stack. Next week at 6:30 p.m., Chapter 17, Moving In. Yeah, you don't put a wood stove on a wood floor. I mean, nowadays you have to have it so far from combustible material and stuff. I'm surprised he didn't get flat rocks from the creek bed and cut like an area in the floor that he could fill with rocks and sand and mud, like to bake it. You know what I mean? And set the stove on that. Well, thank you. I'd love that house after living it. Can you imagine? 2 adults and 3 children in a dugout? Like a room probably no bigger than this. Or maybe twice as wide. Right? Anyway, I'm going to try one more time to get my bodacious bottom in the pool. And then I've got to set up my live stream for 8 o'clock on Life with the Wolfies. Thanks for joining me on the banks of Plum Creek Little House Live. We'll see you next week.